Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Karwan. This is Ishan Sharma, and with me, I have a very special guest this evening. We have Dr. Monisha Chaudhary with us. Monisha Chaudhary, ma'am, is a assistant professor at Delhi University. She teaches history at DU. She specializes in the history of medieval India and Rajasthan, and she has acquired her degree of bachelor's from Miranda House, University of Delhi, and pursued MPhil and PhD degrees from the University of Delhi. She has a working knowledge of Urdu and Persian, the various aspects of the Banjara community, and their social economic contribution in pre colonial states have been explored extensively in a book titled Trade, Transport, and Tanda, uh, Shifting Identities of the Banjaras. And recently, she has published Delhi, A History by Rupa, and The Eternal Dastur Craft. Much of her works are based on the archival documents written in Dhundhari, and she has published and lectured extensively on economic, cultural, social, and environmental history. And today, she's going to talk about a very unique topic, talking Thar, environment, and economy. So, without further ado, it is such an honor to welcome Dr. Manisha Chaudhary, ma'am, on Karwan. Ma'am, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and over to you.
Thank you, Ishan. It is indeed pleasure to be associated with you and to get a platform like Karwan where we can talk about the real history of times and we can actually explore the regions which have not been explored. Without wasting much time, I would like to, because we are late on a bit of it, but in the very first, I would like to say that Thar as a desert has not been seen very well. There are certain works which look at Thar mainly in terms of the economic history, and that too, which are very, very limited to the medieval India, wherein they talk about their agriculture, they try to talk about the trade system, they talk about the Rahdari and all. So there are very specific works which people talk of about Thar, but there's not much when you actually look into Thar and you try to see and understand the desert and try to see its history. Interestingly, various scholars, and especially the geographers, have tried to put forward, and especially McGuinness, that Thar is not a natural desert. It's basically an extension of the African desert that has come down towards this side. And if you try to see them in longitudinal setups, they are more or less latitudinal setups. They are more or less in the same kind of zones. But beyond that, no one has tried to see that Thar was not as dry as Sahara was. Secondly, it is very interesting to see that Thar as a desert is the most densely populated desert of the world, wherein the population is 83 people per square kilometer, which is quite a high number. And beyond that, my queries basically started when I started teaching environmental history, the baton which was handed over to me by Professor Mahesh Rangarajan for the Department of History, that you should continue doing environment. So there actually, whenever I spoke to my students about environment, they were always like confused completely. Is desert an environment? And if it is an environment, why is it an environment? Because they cannot imagine anything about a desert. They can only think desert is a useless piece of land where there's nothing, no people live there. And when you make them think about desert, the maximum they can think is of a camel. And beyond that, if they can Google and find out and say Khejdi is the tree which is in the Thar. So my work basically this evening, I would like to bring forward that Thar as an environmental zone, and then later on how the economy of the Thar is again based on the entire environment which is available to the people, the inhabitants basically. In this, I would say that Thar, which I deal with, because most of the people don't know this again, but I would like to bring forward, there are two Thars. The first Thar is dry Thar, the other one is the wet Thar. Wet Thar is the place where you generally find, your mashers, or you find certain kind of water arrangements. And dry Thar is the region which is completely arid and is dotted with the dunes. So when we talk of dry Thar, we mainly try to look through the state histories, which is Jaisalmer, Barmer, Jodhpur, and then Bikaner again adds to this. When you try to see the geographical layout of Thar, it is again extended towards Churu, Jhunjhunu, and then certain regions of Sikar, Ganganagar, and Hanumangarh as well. So the dry Thar is the one which I try to explore in terms of environment, is based on bioarchives and geoarchives. Now, just to give a brief of geoarchives and bioarchives are about the plants and all the kind of fossil remains, as well as geosperms which are available around in the Thar, which sanctify that Thar was a very, very wet zone, the climate of which was very, very identical to Assam of present day. So in that, and beyond that, when I see the geoarchives are mainly the deposits, the calcareous deposit, the marble deposits, the deposits of granite, and then rhodite, all these kind of sand deposits, or you can say the deposits of minerals are the one which I try to look forward in order to understand that what kind of Thar it was beyond, like beyond our imagination, the Thar, what it was. Archives have been used definitely in order to explore the economy as well as to see the environmental challenges that were faced by the kingdoms and the environmental challenges that were basically noted down by the state in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, which mainly talk about that there is a drought, we need to leave the taxes. Then there is a constant Kal for last 5 years, so we should not tax people. Now this is a Kal which is continuing for say about 4 years. So this year people are migrating out. And what was the pattern of migration? Because if the Thar is dry, the first and foremost thing which every person is supposed to think, that why people are not migrating out of Thar. And what is the reason that people, those who are migrating, they are migrating only in the batches. Secondly, when they migrate, that is always a temporary migration. It is never a permanent migration. So these are the questions which basically the environment answers, that why people have never opted for the permanent migration out of Thar. Thar is dry, as all know. Marusthali is the term which starts coming only in the 17th century. Before that, they are not calling it Marusthali. It is called as Thul, Thal, Dinga, and all those words which only represent dryness. They do not say it is Marusthali. Todd was really, really very afraid of moving towards Marwar. And when, as he sets out of Mewar, he crosses the ranges, and then he says, you know, I'm setting my feet into Marusthali, the region of death. And constantly throughout his work, he goes on noting down in his diary that this is a region of death, region of death. So he's trying to, I think, convince himself, or he's trying to convince his readers that Thar is basically representing death. And then he also tries to say that the natural boundaries has been set by the weather, where he says, my envoy who has been accompanying me from Mewar and leading me towards Marwar is again saying there is a natural boundary, and this boundary is Awal Mewar, Bawal Marwar. So Awal is jahan tak आंवले की फसल है वो हमारा मेवाड़ है, because it is a good crop. और जहां से भी आपका बबूल शुरू होता है वो आपकी मारवाड़ है. Similarly, there are other versions also in the literature, which is vernacular literature, where he records that people constantly talk of bajre ri roti, motha ari dal. देखियो राजा थारी मारवाड़. So that is again saying कि बाजरे की रोटी है और मोठों की दाल है, और राजा हमने देख ली तुम्हारी मारवाड़. So beyond that, there's nothing in the Marwar region, because by the 18th, 19th century, Marwar is something which is synonymous of Thar Desert. People do not want to register, or you can say the British authorities or the officers who are walking in the desert, they do not want to say that beyond Jodhpur there is anything called Thar Desert or there is any state. So Marwar is the synonymous of Thar Desert, wherein we all know Jaisalmer is also one of the major components of Thar. Subsequently, Bikaner is also, and these are all into it. So moving forward on this, I will say the first and foremost thing to understand a desert is the sand, because sand is unanimous, or you can say it is something which is present in every desert, and then only it is identified, be it a cold dry desert or be it a hot dry desert. Again, it is very different from Sahara, because Sahara desert have one kind of setup. Its dunes are longitudinal and they are one single arrangement. When you look at the dunes of Thar, you find there are multiple types of dunes, in which fascinating works have been done by various geologists to try and see that Thar, in particular the Jaisalmer area, is having the dunes which have very fine grain of sand. In the southwestern region of Jaisalmer, the sand grain is little thick with presence of small you can say small pebbles, or basically the volcanic deposits that come out there. So these are two types of presence there, but the grain of soil is fine. But when they compare this with the Bikaner, they say Bikaner sand is finest, means the grain is very, very fine, or you can say it's very, very thin. And because of that, it can very easily flow to the long distances. And that is the reason the Bikaner sand, actually, whenever there is a andhad or a andhi in the region of Bikaner, the sand travels across entire Rajasthan, Haryana, and reaches up till Delhi also, especially in the times of, you can say, May, June, July, and August onwards, you get rain, so do not get to face the sand. So this is the fineness of it by which it moves beyond. Now, coming back to the sand of Jaisalmer, what is visible to the geologist is its dunes are again very, very different. There is a section of Jaisalmer where the dunes are longitudinal. There is a section where there are megabarchans, and there is a section where are barchans. So in this, again, megabarchans are like semi, you can say the crescent shape. And when he talks about, or when Amalkar talks about its extent, he says, these dunes are at a height, in the Jaisalmer especially, these dunes are ranging up to the height of 30 meters to 40 meters. And at times you also find the sand dunes which are 50 meters high in its height. So this kind of sand deposit, which is very, very permanent in nature in certain regions. Again, they say that the desert sand of Jaisalmer basically is not only megabarchans. Within the megabarchans, there are smaller barchans also. And these are like, again, crescent-shaped moon, which are in between, and they're crisscrossing also. Because in a very long run, some air has flowed into one particular direction, and because of that, they have settled like this, and they more or less becoming permanent in nature. On basis of that, when you start looking into the dunes, you find they are parabolic, they are transverse, they are longitudinal. Wavelength, as far as is concerned, there are the ones which wavelength is like 250 to 300 meters, means the two tips of the megabarchans are ranging in between 250 meters to 300 meters, which is again a very, very big number to see, because meters is like you keep walking from one to another, you cross many, many of those Oakleys and Tibas, and they keep on moving forward. But it is still a megabarchan because this is possible with radio sensing. He's further, like Amalkar further, along with C.B. Mishra and other geologists, he says there are nature of it. And in these natures, what you find is there is something called a temporary dune, which is a dhirna. When you move forward from there, you also see they are also called as kochar. Why? Because they are temporary. Similarly, the permanent ones are called as tiba, and the ones who are fresh are called as Oakley. So these are the distinctions which the inhabitants have made, because they do not want to confuse that which one is permanent and which is temporary. And the interesting thing is that since the medieval times, people have been developing around these dunes, and a major of the dunes, especially the tibas, they are even included in the postal addresses. And there are various addresses which are known as Deva ka Tiba, like nearby the Tiba of Deva. Overall, when these people have worked with the Jaisalmer thing, there's another batch of geologists who worked on the dunes of Bikaner, and they again say the soil is very, very fine, the content of mica is very high, and the soil is fine, and winds are constantly blowing. Because of that, you see the sifts on the dunes. You do not see a very continuous movement, but you always see sifts on these dunes. And these dunes are not very tall. They are, they are not very high, and in their height, they will be nearly 10 to 20 meters, which is very small in comparison of your Jaisalmer dunes. Similarly, the Barmer is very, very identical to the Jaisalmer thing. As far as Jodhpur is concerned, it is mainly the rock deposit, which is volcanic, and the deserts around the Osia and other regions of which were basically counted under Marwar region, like Jalore, Medta, Sojat, and all these regions, we again see the dunes are longitudinal and they are transverse. There is nothing, but interestingly, the Bikaner dunes, they are constantly releasing the soil. And when they release it, if you touch the dune and you try to put something over the dune, and if you move it, then like within the movement of say about 2 to 3 feet, the entire dune will split out, or you can say it will go and become a level land. So there is nothing permanency because the grain is very, very fine. So these are the basic differences which exist in this desert, and this is all known by the same name, that is Thar Desert. Moving beyond it, we see there are various palayas. These palayas are mainly salt palayas in Thar Desert, and the major ones or the popular ones are Didwana and Sambar. These are, again, when we see the archaeological evidences and all, we try and get to see that these are all basically the remnants of the Thetis Sea. Thetis Sea, because most of the geologists have already concluded that Thar was a coastal region. There was a presence of Jurassic age. People lived here. There were the animals like ostrich, and you had in Jurassic age, you had dinosaurs there. So this entirely proves that it was the sea coastline, which was ranging from the present Gujarat up till Kashmir. And when the land masses moved, the Thetis Sea has actually moved out, and whatever water what got their catchment, or you can say the water that got caught there, has made the palayas, or they have made the salt lakes. Now they are major source of revenue for the state. We get clear evidences from the times of the 15th century, where the state is constantly trying to control the Sambar Lake, wherein they say that the Sambar is a major source of revenue, so it cannot be just taken away like that. Archaeology, again, gives us agro-archaeological evidences. It gives us paleobotanical remains. It gives us paleozoological evidences also. When I talk of paleobotanical evidences, here is the prime one is Akal deposit. Akal deposit helps us to know that Jurassic age was very, very prominent in this region. Secondly, there are various branches, or you can say there are various logs which are available, and when they have been dated, they have been found like nearly 1.65 million years old, which is again because of the Jurassic presence, or you can say it was a coastal region. The length of those things prove that it was a coastal region. Moving beyond from Akal, if Jaisalmer and Lathi is seen, the calcareous deposits of Lathi and Jaisalmer again indicate that it was a region which had thick presence of the soil at the bottom, and because of that, whenever anything moved down, the fossil got created very well. Barmer, again, we have the cocoa remains, we have plant remains, we have Cretaceous age, and we have angiosperms. And these are mainly, and it is very interesting to note, Barmer, which is now mainly a saline water area, had all the fresh water deposits. All the evidences or all the fossils which are zoopaleo, these are all indicating that fresh water, salt fish was there. And similarly, there were many other varieties of the fish which were mainly available in the fresh water. Similarly, presence of algae again indicates that this was a region dominated by freshwater lakes, or to say water which was potable, which was not saline, or to say in regular terms, it was a sweet water which people could have consumed. The marble deposits start from the region of Nagaur till mid MP. They are again an indication that there was a constant volcanic heat, and due to this volcanic heat, these things have dried up, these things have matured, and finally we have a cooked marble. And that is the reason there are certain areas where the marble has cooked more, and you get the finest variety of marble, which is again known as Makrana marble. Most of the people again don't know it is known after the village from where it is basically taken out. Tertiary age evidences are available to us from the giant deposits around the area of Bikaner, Kapurdi, and various other regions like Noha, Pokhar, all these. These are small villages around the, you can say, in the districts of Bikaner and Jaisalmer. Further, we see microfossils. Microfossils in the Kapurdi are deposited in the Multani Mitti, the fuller earth. We all know the specific specification of fuller earth is that it conserves the fossil as it is because of the high content of oxygen. When it is controlling, when it is freezing it, we see there are fruits, there are leaves, there are freshwater animals, and there are large number of angiosperms, which constantly indicate that it was a coastal region. Similarly, we have cocoa deposits. we have the deposits of various other plants, which are mainly the coastal region plants. Tertiary times, it is also represented by fuller earth deposits of Tethys Sea, because this is basically the calcareous base of Tethys Sea, which later on converted into this, and there the animals basically got deposited. Another very significant example is custard apple, which is now not available in those regions, and especially it is not even produced till Delhi. Custard apple evidences are very well available there. We have evidences of habitat freshwater turtles also, that too in Jamner. Jamsar and Jamner are the sub-districts of Jaisalmer, and these are all again indicating that this was a very habitable area, and later on how the human habitations have developed onto this. Another very prominent evidence to us is from Mesolithic age, which is of an ostrich and ostrich egg shell. These ostrich egg shells again indicate, and they are largely available basically in Tilotra and Balotra. In Balotra and Tilotra, and in Tilwada again, you find the eggshells of ostrich, which have been basically consumed by the humans. So again, hunting is very popular with them, and they are hunting the animal like ostrich, which is quite huge to hunt on and to survive on that. Overall, we can say it was very a fertile area. Also, the evidences of rice from Kalibanga, the evidences of barley, and various evidences of rice in the region of Jaisalmer and Sindh, and evidences of rice in the Malpura region of rice are constantly appearing there, which is basically cultivated around the 13th and 14th century. They are again very well talking that yes, this region had quite moist environment by which all these crops could be made available, and they were all available to these people in a very, very short term. Paleo-Mesolithic age is again, Manwar is the region where there is a faunal dominance. Faunal dominance where sheep, goat, buffaloes are available. And this is Paleo-Middle age. We do not have much evidences of Upper Paleo, where it could be that there is a discontinuity, or the people have moved out, or there are no evidences which are available to us. But there are tools of rhyodite, which again indicate very clearly if there are tools made of rhyodite, that means humans were living there. Moving forward in the Mesolithic age, where the Holocene also coincides, we see evidences around Bagor and Tilwada. There is a change in the flora and fauna. The first time the change is visible in flora and fauna. And this is where the environment is becoming warm. Various small tools which indicate that people were engaging in pastoralism, they were hunting, they were gathering, and there were other ways of life which they were constantly doing. We have remains of the kettles, where the kettles have been slaughtered. The bones are basically cut into particular way. There are holes in the bones which have been created by these people to make jewelries. So overall, the conclusions that come from there is, in Mesolithic age, this region was thickly dominated and people were living here. It was quite well habited. Rice cultivation, and again, around the Nimka Thana, where now you only find, like barley, jowar, and wheat. There again, you have rice cultivation evidences, which are very, very prominent, and the time period have been very clearly established by people, that is 2075. The archaeologist who have worked on this basically talks about various other crops also, and he says that all these crops are mainly only the crops of moist region, and in those times people had no way of channels, they had no way of making canals, so therefore it is very, very clear that natural environment was so that they could produce all these things. Now I'll come to the literary evidences to show, because we see that in Mesolithic age for the first time we see that the warm environment is setting in and the weather is getting dry. To see this or correlate this, the literary evidences that indicate to these dry weathers, which were becoming very, very intense, are various, and especially Hung Tasan, who has written in 7th century, he writes very, very extensively. Basically, he is visiting a Buddhist shrine, Bhadrakali Thar, and there he says, this is Bhadrakali Thar, the region is very, very difficult to move. You cannot move in this region, and this is a very, very intense zone given to the dryness, and people can even die in this region. But again, we do not have any instance wherein he says it is Marustali. Moving beyond that, We have Ibn Khaldun in the 13th century, who again writes about the Indian desert, and he calls it as Indian desert, which has to be transferred in order to reach Kannauj, because Kannauj by then was a popular city, and people, and especially the Arabians and Egypt and Cairo, where Ibn Khaldun was living from there, large number of trade consignments were coming towards Kannauj. So automatically these people who are moving, they are also writing about it. A 8th century geographer, a Arab geographer, Idris, he writes very extensively about the Thar Desert, and he talks about it in terms of its dunes. And he says, this is a very intense desert. When you cross the Panchanad or you cross the tributaries of Indus, you reach to a very, very intense desert, which is nearly killing in its nature. Along with killing, it is not given with water, and whatever water is available, it is not at all suitable for drinking. So this is the experience of an Arab who is coming here. And then he writes extensively about the tribes who are available in this region. He also writes about the economy of the region. He says there are Zut and Mids. And these Zuts and Mids, these people are basically the tribes who live here. They raid people, they loot the cattle, they loot them, and they collect their items. And this is 8th century. So when he's talking of the dominance of people in this region, and he says we don't even know from where they come in these dunes and where they basically go and hide. So no one who is even coming with the army can actually fight them. So these are like basic literary evidences. We also have inscriptions, the Lodwara inscription, Sati Memorial, Govardhan inscription, and Bogathali inscriptions. These again talk about dryness, and they constantly they do not talk about dryness in a very specific manner, but they talk of dryness in a way like the dryness has been set in, and cow has to be protected. And even if people are going for Veer Gati in order to protect their cattle, it is very well accepted. So these kind of evidences are with us, which indicate that yes, there was intense dryness by those times in this particular region. Literary evidences have been many more, and we cannot authenticate what is the literary value of the thing. So for ensuring that, I have used Komal Kothari's method, wherein he says any story which your mother or your grandmother have told you that she has heard in her childhood is the way by you can think that the folklore or the folk tales which you hear in your homes are authentic or not authentic, but actually are there as a tradition of knowledge or are surviving with the people for a very, very long time. There are evidences with us from the literary evidences of 16th and 17th century, where the court records are writing that these are the way that you ensure your survival in the Thar Desert. And in this, there is like Atiopus Pulkodosh. So this is basically Atiopus Pulkodosh. So it is for the people who are into agriculture, that if you have reached to the month of Posh, because when you need to sow your seed for the Rabi crop, it has to be done in time. But if you have reached the post season, then it is nobody who can be blamed for it. You yourself are responsible for a very bad crop in your field. Similarly, Dal ko chukyo bandryo, Asad ko chukyo kasro. So, jaise like the monkey falls from the branch, and it is like the one who leaves the Asad. So it is very clear, people were supposed to sow the seeds in the months of Asad. And if they miss it and they go to the Posh, then definitely the crop is going to be very, very bad, and they cannot blame anyone. Similarly, Pavaniya to Avaniya, Pani Kulka Davaniya. That means the visitors are about to come or the guests are about to come, but who is having water to entertain them? So that is again a very, very significant thing of the 15th century, which indicates that people had no water with them or they had no resources to actually entertain the guest in those times. Beyond that, there is again, when people are facing the drought, they constantly, like you also have this in Mahto Nansiri Mahto Marwar Pargana Rivigat. You also have this in Mahto Rikhyat, where he says, Kal Kusum mein naam rahe banman bakri oot, wo khawe wo phire chare sukha chana thoot. So that is in the seasons, when there is a Kal, and the Kal are again, large number of varieties are there, which says this is Kal, then there is Ikkal, then there is Dukal, then there is Sukal, and Sukal is a good time, and then there could be various ways where the Kal goes on. And these Kals are basically determined when you do not have the rain, And if there is no rain, then automatically they try to explain it in relevance of the rain that comes there, or you can say basically that is not available to them in this particular season. So this is what he says, Kal Kusum mein na mare Baman Bakri mood. So Kal Kusum, in the sense, जब काल पड़ता है, जब drought बहुत ज्यादा होता है, 3 लोग नहीं मरते हैं, बामन बकरी ऊंट. One is Brahman, the other one is camel, and the third one is goat. Why they do not die is वो खावे वो फिरे चरे. That means the Brahman will basically go and live on alms, and similarly वो खावे फिरे चरे, and then sukha chana thud, and the rest of the 2 animals like the camel and the goat, they basically simply can survive on the thud and the leftovers, or you can say the small twigs or the dried leaves, or you can say like all kind of vegetation that could be available to them. So this is like your major environmental conception of the Thar, wherein it has been mainly understood that it was a dry region and there was no water. But before coming to that particular point, I would like to say that this is the geographical setting of the Thar, which we have to keep in mind when we move forward, then when this particular region is getting drier. The drying up of the lake, when the Palayas, or you can say the regions around Didwana and Sambar have been tested, they found that it basically started drying up in 1900 BC. And later on in 1000 BC, Didwana finally dried up. When Didwana dried up, this is the onset of the dry seasons in the Thar, and then it continued to dry from this region to 300 AD. So which is very clear that when Hindustan is coming, the dryness has already set in. All that what archaeologists and geologists have been able to prove is something which is very scientific, which is rational on basis of the material that is available as per the remote sensing. And when it comes to deciding the date of Ghaggar, they say that this dried around 6th and 7th century, because before that there are some evidences which are available to us which indicate that by 4th century the water started going down in the river, or you can say the level of water was going down, but it was yet not dried up. But when you look at Indus tributaries, we find from the 4th century onwards, Indus started moving towards the Himalayas, or you can say it started moving upward towards the north. As we see, the Yamuna has moved from Delhi, and earlier it used to flow from Gurgaon and then reach Delhi, but now Gurgaon gets nothing out of the Yamuna, and therefore the lakes around Gurgaon and all the regions around Delhi, they do not get water because Yamuna has shifted its course towards north. Similarly, we find that in 4th century, Indus is also shifting its course and it is moving toward upwards. In this, the records which have been done by Idris, who is a geographer himself, an Arabian geographer, and you start comparing those records with the Mughal records, or you can say Delhi Sultanate records, which are very well written, or you can say they write in terms of the cities, because as per the medieval times, the city is a place of enlightenment. When you start comparing these dots, or you can start comparing these 2 parameters, we find that from 4th century to the 13th century, there's a major shift in the river, so much so that some rivers have moved 100 kilometers up, or some rivers have moved nearly 200 kilometers up. Multan, which was earlier on the point of the river, has now become an upper zone, or you can say the river has already crossed the Multan, or it has come towards towards more of the second city which developed around it, which is Konar. Overall, these kind of descriptions about the weather are very well, and about basically the natural sources. They are a major source for us to know that how the climate was changing in the entire region. I think we will be running out of time. So before that, I would come to the economy aspect of it. In terms of economy, when I talk of Thar, we do not know basically, as we all generalize about Mesolithic and Paleolithic and Neolithic ages, that people were doing hunting, they were hunters, gatherers, and then agriculture came in and people started cooking and all that. But beyond that, when it comes to the early, or you can say early medieval period, we have constant sources like Hyun Tasan, who is writing. Similarly, you have other sources which are mainly inscriptional in nature. There are people who are moving from Ghazni in the 7th century, and they have come down to the Hanumangarh, which is called Bhatner earlier, And in the 7th century, they are moving towards, because of the constant raids or invasions from the northwest, they are moving towards Jaisalmer. So they are giving proper descriptions that why we are moving and what is the fear. So if we start comparing them, we get very strong evidences to put forward that the economy of this desert was mainly based on the revenues, or you can say the toll tax or the rahadari, which these people collected very regularly from anyone who is traveling through this region. Why this region? I mean, why people will move through a desert? Why shall not they go via, you can say, the northwestern frontier, where basically the Punjab region and all are much more facilitated? Most significant thing here is what we find from Delhi Sultanate onwards again, is the continuity which these routes ensure to the sea coast. And whatever items are coming from Sindh, whatever items are coming from Arabia, they find this route much more easier to reach the central lands of India rather than going via the mountainous routes and then going through the hazard of facing different kind of weather. Here it is like you are coming from a dry weather, you are entering from a dry weather, and you're finally landing up. Only trouble here is the Indus, which you're supposed to cross, or you can say the various tributaries of the Indus, which you have to face on. In terms of its trade, or in terms of its location there, we find from your 13th century, then 14th century, there's a continuation. You have 11th century records, which are collected later on. And they constantly talk about the region as the one which is given to large number of professions. What all professions? Again, I'm not aware. But when we get Methone and Siri Vigat, we see the professions that are there are mainly the karkhanas inspired by the Mughals, and all kind of activities are happening. Going little earlier to it, we see in the 14th and 15th century, the traders are writing the records, or you can say the Jain traders who are moving through this region in order to come across Gujarat, pass through this region and enter into the regions which are Iran and beyond. When they are traveling through this region, there's a large number of items which they are carrying, which are supposed to be exported from India, and there are a large number of items which they import. So Makran as a post is very significant for them. Here, they see that they are close to the sea route. Secondly, they are on the route where they can easily access the things. Delhi Sultanate already started getting interactions from Africa and all. So we have various evidences of ivory. We have evidences of animals that are imported. We have various evidences of, you can say, acacia and the varieties of wax, honey that was imported from those regions. And similarly, the people of Gujarat who are taking out the cotton material, they are taking out the lilies, and all these are basically via through this route only. But interestingly, what has happened there? In the 12th and 13th century, when these Jain traders are moving into this region, they are not initially participating in anything, but by the 13th century, they started putting their position very strongly. They started making temples, they started making dharamshalas, and they started investing into making of talabs. So we have again a constant tradition which tells us, yes, these people are coming. We also have Jain temple records which tell us that there was a constant request by the traders of Jaisalmer who are requesting a yati to come from Gujarat and hold the meetings or to hold the sermons basically in the month of Sawan, when all the sages are basically stationed. So like that, we have a very continuous channelization from one record to the another, which helps us to basically get an idea about the region and its economy. Coming back to, because trade is something which is very large, I will first speak about the agriculture. When I talk of agriculture, I have found that we have believed, or you can say mainly when people start comparing Indian central lands to the dry zones or the mountainous regions, or to say that Northeast as well, they start thinking they have not contributed economically at all. But in order to see the economic contribution of these regions, what we have to do is we have to look into the sources which are mainly from these people. And we find that there are a large number of sources which again indicated that this desert was producing wheat, gram, bun, kapas, guar, moong, mot, bajra, and along with that, there was rice as well. Rice was not much, but yes, they are importing rice from Sindh also. so the entire picture, when I came across these records, I realized that the picture gets completely changed because they were at least self-sufficient in terms of their population in those times. Whenever there is a akal, we see no evidence from the state that the state is doing some welfare kind of activity. Like if I talk in comparison of the Mughals, whenever there is a famine, the Mughals are promptly starting the free kitchens. The Mughals are promptly going for the ways by which the welfare of the people can be done. We see whenever there is a kal, the state is not at all interfering. People are migrating. The state is fine with it. Only thing when the state interferes is when they come back, the state wants to tax them. So that is it about state intervention with the people, or you can say with the life of people. So this is very strange. That means the crop which they could grow was sufficient. Or to say, because we have some evidences where we see the Deepa, the one who is a trader in the Marwar, and this case basically comes in terms of in the Bahi, basically for the rates that have been charged on him. He was moving from Marwar into Mewar, wherein he was selling the salt and coming back with the eatable grains. The Radari, when he was trying to enter back into Marwar, was enhanced, and therefore he complained. His complaint was not listened by the Raja of Marwar, and he said, no, you have to give this enhanced thing. So he said, fine, the region is already facing the famine, and I got the eatables, and if you want, I can go back, I have no problem. So this is how, we get scattered evidences which help us to weave back that, okay, this kind of setup was there. In terms of crops, how they were growing all these, we have large number of evidences in the Bahis, which are 17th century and late 16th century, which say they are do sathiyo and ek sathiyo. And when Mehta Nansi is writing about, when Mehta Nansi is writing in the mid of the 17th century, he constantly refers back that there was Astana, there was, along with Astana, his brothers were there when they were moving out of Pali. Pali was a very rich region, and it was dotted by the people who were basically Paliwas, the Brahmins. And Pali was a very, very rich region, wherein the people who were Karodpatis and Lakpatis were living. So Pali as an emporium of trade. That is first thing. When he's writing in the 17th century, he again is going back to the Jain sources, referring them and writing. When you start looking the Jain sources around Pali also, you also get that, yes, it was a very rich region and large amount of trade was passing through it. Pali in itself was a great center for various handicrafts, to say wool items, wool blankets, cotton, opium exchanges, and to say like sword industry and steels, to say that like there had many, many things by which they were, the artisans had a very, very dominant say in this. So when Astana, who is traveling through this region in the 12th century, this is from where Mehta Nansi picks. He says, in the 12th century, when Astana started moving from this region, those who came from Kannauj and settled here, and his father was mainly living in the western areas, and he told his children that there is no scope of growing yourself into this particular dry desert, so better you move towards Gujarat. And when these three brothers were moving towards Gujarat, on the way, they met the people of Pali because it was already evening. So they actually stayed there and they requested the people of Pali village that please give us accommodation for the night, or you give us a night halt. When this thing comes, these people are like, oh, right, we will give you. But in the same night, the Mayrs attacked. And when they are staying here, the villagers did not allow them to come within the circumferenced region of the village. They said, you do not come in our arena, but you stay outside our village. We will give you food. We will give you, space to, station your animals. We will give you space for, we'll give you fodder for your animals and all that. But try not to enter our village, because we are always very fearful of the Mayrs, who are the looters of this region, and they loot us every now and then. It's a very famous saying what he records there in the 17th century. मारा गांव में तो खणारी थाली भी पोखी कोनी, सो अठे कुंडरो जीव बाकी रहे. In the sense they are saying, हमारे यहाँ जिस हांडी में हम लोग खाना पकाते हैं, मेरों से वो भी सुरक्षित नहीं है, तो इंसान के जीवन की तो क्या ही बात करनी है. It's that kind of thing. So when these things are happening, these people, they said, okay, all right, we have no problem. You just give us a space and food, we stay outside. They stayed. In the night, the Mayrs attacked. When the Mayrs attacked, they could give them defense, and they killed 14 Mayrs. And the villagers, when they woke up in the morning, they realized, because early morning, the Champa used to go out of the village in order to go to the pastures. And when the Champa is moving out, the women have seen there are 14, 15 people who are killed. So they came back and they reported that, gaon mein they have spoken to each other and said, ki lagta hai unko koi maar gaya. And they had so many people with them. And then they saw these brothers who are, coming from a distance and said, in the night they came, they tried to attack your village, we killed them and we chased them. So this is already the sunrise and we are late for our journey, onward journey, and we move now. So these villagers, they said, no, for the first time we are safe from the mairs and this is what you could fight. So you could be the people of royal blood and therefore you should stay with us. And they decided to stay there. In the initial phase, he also explains that how from the 12th century till the 14th century, the Jodhpur state came into being. Because he talks that Astana gave them protection. Later on, he married to another Gehlot family, which was a neighbor village of the region. And the girl was the single child in the family. So he said, your entire property becomes mine. And this is how he expanded his territory. He was a security giver here. He was a protection giver to that particular village also. And this is for the first time they started making their reputation as the royal blood by securing or by extending the security and protection to these people. This moves further and then he continues, go on. He also explains that treachery is what these people have done. And he constantly says, these people are also bad because when Mehto Nancy is writing, I can understand that his consciousness of that because he has already been thrown out of the state job by then when he's writing this figure. So he says these people have also been bad. They have been treacherous, like what they did with the girl's father. That is one very prominent thing you must note. But for a historian, what comes out from there is, or for a student of history, what comes out is that this region was very, very significant economic zone. And there was a constant threat of the mairs, which again, Idris has explained in the 8th century, whenever he is coming towards the deserts of India for trading activities towards Kannauj. So we see a continuity that this region is dominated by some communities who basically believed in loot. What we get to see, overall, the desert survived on the raid and the trade. These are two major trades there. Coming forward in the 14th century, there's a horse consignment which is moving towards, which is coming from Arabia, which is moving towards Delhi. And that was looted by the people of Marwar. And this is again a Rathod. He is a Vikram Dev. He looted it. We also get evidences when Firoz Shah Tughlaq was stationing on the lake in the Ajmer region. He was again looted. His entire material was taken off. Rao Bika's story of 15th century, again very popular because his father-in-law was a great, robber. He even robbed up till Multan. We have Vikram Dev, the one who was so popular that he raided beyond the Panchnad. That means जो पंचनाद है जो पंजाब वाला एरिया है इससे भी आगे जाकर वो मुल्तान तक वो भी रेड करता था. So like that we see this region was given to the raid and trade. Trade was definitely which needed protection, and this is how the state started making up. When we see Jaisalmer also, we see Bhatis also survived on the trade. When we see the Rahdari, the total income of Jaisalmer state in the 16th century was 75,000, out of which nearly 52,000 was from the transit duties. Similarly, we see Bikaner, wherein Depal Joya is moving, and he gets to know that there is there's a group of raiders who are ready to attack him when he crosses from the region of Marwar, and they will let him not reach Bikaner region. So he approaches Vikram Dev and he requests him that please give me protection. So Vikram Dev extends protection. He also extends him the security, which are the soldiers which he has kept on service. So they accompanied him up till Bikaner, and when they moved back, they charged a good Rahdari from Depal. We have large number of evidences which talk about Rahdari, also which was controlled by the Johia families of Bikaner, and they made large amount of money because they were बड़ा दौरारो व्यापार. That means जो large trade routes हैं वो उनको control करते हैं Joyas, and therefore they have made good amount of money. Bikaner because Bikaner was a central point for the entire trade which was coming via Punjab, entering Bikaner and then heading towards Delhi. So like that you have large number of evidence, and see the Thar in its nature has not changed even when the Mughals came here, or to say even when the Britishers tries to control this region, because we see that the 17 camels which were laden with the royal treasure it was Shah Jahan's convoy which was going towards Gujarat. And when they crossed via Ajmer and they entered a small region around the Barmer, around the region of, I'm sorry, I'm missing it. So they were trying to enter Chanderi. So Chanderi, the Baudi, near that particular place, the entire caravan was looted. All the 17 camels were chased away and they were taken into the desert. I'm sure this was not mainly for the cattle, but it was mainly for the treasure which the Shah Jahan was carrying. Like this, you have ample evidences which prove us that not only the cattle, money, everything, the loot was very popular there. Even the royal people engaged with the loot, and it was an accepted norm that the loot happens. No doubt at times the states were able to recover their items. Otherwise, most of the time, these raiders used to go into the intense desert and no one who is not a local would be able to basically chase them. Coming to the crop, because this is one part, coming to the crop, we have savage, we have rail, we have like this nearly 8 to 10 varieties in which they try to facilitate their crops. They say Sejo, Barsalo, Unhali, Barsali, then they will say Piwal, Dhora Pani, Chadyo. All these terms are basically related to agriculture, that how hard it is basically to grow, but still they are capable of growing and then getting a good crop. So Dhora Pani Chadyo, that means this is a flood water of Luni that comes here, and they try to trap this water in the dunes, and there they try to grow something. And mainly it is the rice which they grow, because the deposits are of clay, and on the top when the rice is there, it is basically transplanted rice. Barsali is where all the villagers are mainly growing, bajri, chana, gehu, all these, and these all are basically only by the rain. There is no other way of irrigation for them. Unhali is rabi crop. Here, Unhali, they entirely depend on some artificial means of irrigation. Artificial herein is not like, getting something. Basically, that means they have collected the water in a dhibra, charge or something, and then they try to use this water by some or the other ways in order to grow this. ऐसे ही आपका sehaj है. Sehaj is groundwater. The areas where the groundwater is good and it is also sweet, they try to use it for the crops. Again, we see how significant is the cattle wealth through these depictions, because we get most of the wells in the Marwar, most of the wells in the Jaisalmer and Barmer region also, they all try to signify their importance by saying, हमारे कुओं पे 3000 गायें पानी पी सकती हैं. Similarly, there are villages which say nearly they are maintaining 1500 cow. All of them are maintained throughout the year, and there is no scarcity of water in the region. So these numbers are quite large, 1500, 3000, 4000. And I will not say these are exaggerations for the very simple reason, because these were the only ways to survive. These were cattle herds were the only way for these people to survive whenever the drought set in. And when we see their migration patterns also, we are able to say it with assertion that yes, the cattle wealth was something very significant. And in this we see in the first batch, when there is a drought for first year, in the very first batch, the cow will be moved out and they will be taken towards Malwa. If the drought is continuing in the second year, then a small batch of people will move out along with the cattle, which are another kind of cattle which are maintaining, like buffaloes and all. So they move out with them. And if there is a trikal, which is like now there is no water, no fodder, and no grain. So if this is the trikal, then in this patch, the entire population moves out along with the cattle, which is your cow, but the sheep, goat, and camel, they still do not. They still stay there. And when the drought continues in the fourth year, and now there's nothing, then only the goat and sheep will move, and lastly the camels will move out. So these are the ways which you can join the dots and find out that yes, this is how the migration happened, and this is how they were self-sufficient in their own requirements. There were minor things which they imported also, like as I said, from Sindh they were getting rice, and there were various other items which they were importing from Gujarat, which were mainly coming from Eastern India. But in terms of wheat, they were self-sufficient. In terms of tarkaris, they were self-sufficient. We have a long list of all the vegetables which were produced by these people. and mainly it is maintained by the Jodhpur and Jaisalmer state. They say that yes, there is a tarkari, and these tarkaris are small season crops, and they are in abundance because the soil is so rich, and just by throwing the seeds you can get the crop. These kind of descriptions we generally get about them. Moving beyond from the water and the crop, we see talab is another popular way. There's entire culture of the talab. If somebody has read Anupam Mishra, that person will know that India was a culture of talabs, and since the time India has given up on making talabs, India is facing droughts. This is like Anupam Mishra's argument. But when you see the desert or you see the talabs of desert, we find these all talabs are like they are Gopila talab, Jaini talab, Chana talab, Guni talab. There are some after the name of villages. There are some which are financed or patronized by somebody. And lastly, there are some which are made, there are very few which the state has basically made. You find 2 talabs like that in Jaisalmer and 1 in Jodhpur, but there's no other talab which is basically financed by the state or the state tried to patronize them. Mostly the talabs are made by either the traders. If not the traders, then the locals. Most of the talabs are again kacha talabs. They are required because the cattle wealth has to be maintained. And accordingly, as per their capacity, the talabs have been explained. Like they say, this is Barsandio, this is Satmasio, this is Atmasio, this is Dasmasi. So like that, the talab which stays for 10 months is Dasmasi, Satmasio, 7 months, and like so on and so forth. So like that, we are again reaching to the conclusion that the cattle was a very, very essential thing for them. Industry around the camel was very, very huge. We have large variety of camel breeds in this region. This is another debate. Richard Bulliett says Indian camel, the single humped camel and double humped camel. This is again a very long debate. I would not like to discuss here, but camel in terms, he says that this is an African thing which has come to India, and single humped camel is, is capable of surviving in the dry regions. Around this camel also, we see large number of developments. We have various breeds of camel, which is Jaisalmeri, Bikaneri, and then a regular, which is called Marwadi, which is around Jodhpur. And you see Raikas, especially in Jaisalmer and Badmer, the region where the breeding grounds of the camels are, they are all the regions where the state is constantly supporting the Raikas and trying to put them next to the Rajput villages. The settlement pattern, when you see of these villages, you see all the Raikas, basically Raikas are the one who breed, they are camel breeders, and all these Raika villages are next to the Rajput villages, and Rajputs were mainly in the state services, therefore the camel was there. Why they will need camel? Because already the horse was in, but what we see is the camel is the only method, which is, mode of transport, which is successful in the desert. And here, again, we have evidences, very, very frequent evidences, wherein people constantly mention, "Oont chadiyo chakri kare." That means the person is in the state service by riding. He's doing the state service by riding the camel. That doesn't mean he's constantly, every day and morning in and out, he's riding the camel. But what he is doing is, while riding the camel, the person is either a messenger, the person is either a person who's keeping watch, or he's the one who's patrolling the area. So, he's keeping an eye on the activities of the state. These are the, camel industry, which is evolving here. Camels, other than this, the other one is Bikaner, is again the camel which built-wise is huge. Colonel Todd has written extensively about the camels, but yes, he has only written what he has seen. So he says this is the best breed of the camel in this desert, and they are like, their symmetry is there on the face, and you see their neck is very, very even, and you see their, the fur is very good. All those things he tries to explain about the Bikaneri camel. And basically, he also talks about the blood flow, which I'm sure he was not aware what he's talking, but yes, he spoke about the blood flow in its head. So he said it's very even, the blood flow is also very even, therefore it looks beautiful. But when you see structure-wise, you see Bikaner camel is very, very huge in comparison of the camel of Marwad and Jaisalmer. Jaisalmer camel make-wise is the smallest, but it is the fastest. Bikaneri camel are basically good to be the animals for carrying the load. They are again constantly employed to carry the load, but the Jaisalmeri camel is always for the riding. There are 7 to 10 evidences which indicate that the state is constantly requesting that give us the Jaisalmeri camel, because we need to ride fast. In one night, we need to reach that particular destination, and therefore we need the Jaisalmeri camel. So like that, we have an entire industry around the camel, and this is a very, you can say, uh, industry which is giving large amount of money to the state, and state is trying to enhance it, try to grow it. I'm skipping the goat and the sheep industry because this is again very detailed, because every part was used, fur, skin, toes, everything was nearly used of the animal, and they were continuing in this. Beyond the cattle wealth, if we see, we have salt lakes. All the salt production in this region was mainly getting exported. The locals, those who were involved in this, were called Kharlos, and Kharla is also the region where the salt is produced. And when we see the number of salt lakes, we see around the 17th century in Marwar only, there were more than 700 salt palayas, or you can say the salt agars, or agar is basically the plots where the people were producing salt, in which the salt mines of Pokhran were not counted because there was a disturbance in the region and they were not able to count it. So 700 is basically from your Jalore, Medha, and then particularly Jodhpur and the Dwana region. Revenue from this region was so rich that finally Akbar, when he got to know that in a year there is nearly 20 million lakh dam is getting generated on this, he said that this particular area, all the Rajputs are autonomous in their internal Watan Jagirs, but we have to take care of this because this is going to be the state's affair. And therefore, the Sambar Lake was taken as a Khalsa and it was continuing. Later on, Aurangzeb's time also, we have a consistent documentation about that how Akbar and then Jahangir and then all tried to understand. And as the Mughal state withered away, we see the Jodhpur and Jaipur state were constantly in fights in order to control the Sambar Lake. This was mainly because the revenues were very high from this area. And finally, we also have the evidence from the 16th century where Akbar stopped people from manufacturing salt on their own, because there are 2-3 villages around the Sambar Lake which were manufacturing salt for their own usage, and they started selling it in like you can say the gradual process. They started selling it. He said no one is allowed to produce salt privately. Salt will be produced. It will be something which is required by everyone, and we all know large number of Banjaras were employed to carry the salt produced in Sambar towards Bengal and the areas which were deficit of the salt. Because ultimately it secured them good price, and secondly to make the deficit areas surplus, and secondly again when it moves there is a rahadari, and then there is a poll tax, there is a security, and finally the wheel of the revenue for taxation sets in for the state. The purpose is ultimately to collect some more tax in form of some or the other way. So overall, there are various other such industries. I have majorly discussed 3, like agriculture and this and beyond it. Along with that, in terms of economy, we see revenues of the state. There are every kind of taxes which the state is taking. Besides the rahadari and toll taxes, I will just give you one example, which is Meka Soda. Meka Soda is when the state is saying we will predict when the rain will come, and the people who want to know when the rain will come shall pay us the taxes, and people are paying the tax on this. Similarly, a hasil. Whenever a new king is coming to the throne, he is constantly asking for a hasil. That means the state, the people or the subjects should pay him a hasil so that he can come to the throne and he can meet his expenses. Similarly, there are ghugri. Ghugri is the protection fee, which you must pay. Otherwise, you can be looted, you can be raided, and we are not responsible. Because state extension was extensively in desert, and there was no way by which the state can actually move out of its capital city. Like we have in Jaisalmer, it's only the Sonar Killa around which they were providing the administration. When we look for the Marwar, we see it is only the Chidiya Tunk where the fort is and the city is developed because of the influence, like the Jaipur one. And beyond that, they are not ready to give the protection. So they all have to pay the ghugri. Other than that, we see whenever the rahas are closed, whenever the state is seeing the Bhumiyas are rebelling, there is a constant raid or there is a unrest in the area, the state tries to close some of the rahas, or they try to close down some of the routes. And whenever they are trying to close down, we see very frequently within 6 months or 8 months, people are requesting that please open these routes because we have to move. And they're constantly pleading that whatever the security is available or not, we are responsible for our own security, but let us move from this region so that we can actually travel and trade. Overall, to say the economy of Thar is quite rich. Along with the camel industry, the other popular industry was horse. Horse breeding grounds around Jaisalmer, there are many, many. They are mainly controlled by the Rajputs, and they not only control the entire horse breeding industry, they also control the basnis, they also control the pastures, and they try to take control of the talabs in order to produce the horses. And this industry of horse is basically growing because there is a constant demand during those times, and they are constantly getting sold. So like that, you have various other aspects of the Thar economy which can be explored and can be seen. And it can be very well put forward that, and it can be very well asserted that Thar in itself was very much self-sufficient. There were certain deficits because of the drought, but again, that was not taken so severely by people that they always tried to do migrations in batches. And after doing those migrations, whenever the conditions were suitable, or whenever they get the first news about the rain, they try to fall back into their regions and they live there. Mehto Nancy again gives us the number of villages, the number of cities, the number of people who live there. So he gives again large numbers about the cities like Jalore, which is again a very, very dry region. He says more than 700 people are Maheshwaris and Agarwals. And then he gives you the number, these many Regar, these many Rangres, these many Sunar and all. So he gives you numbers about the professional class who are basically stationed in the cities. Now, Medta in itself is a big pargana. Jalore in itself is a very big pargana. Along with them, there are many, many mojas. Those are small villages. What is happening in these areas is these centers became centers of trade. Like Medta city became the center, Jalore city became the center, Pali became a center, Jodhpur became a center, and you have similarly large number of cities which evolved. But basically, they all evolved on terms of the trade, and these are all artisans who live here. But still, we have no number of the peasants who live in the desert or who live in the dune areas where they are doing cultivation. Entirely this culture which evolves around it is the peasant is only paying the tax, whatever it is producing. Secondly, they are not again very well controlled because there is every possibility that they grow, and if they have sufficient, they pay the taxes and then they move out. But again, the Bahis are indicative that the revenue system was very much in place by the 17th century. We have no significant source to talk about this in the 13th, 14th or 12th century, or you can say before that. The records of Humayun, they talk about the desert, its intensity, the people who live there, what kind of things they do. How significant is the animal industry can be highlighted from the fact that he was in exile, and when he moved around the region of Jaisalmer, the Raval did not give him protection, but also charged him for killing 18 cows. So, Humayun, just like he has to flee away from that particular place in the night because he realized that might he will take fine from him, wherein he's like hand to mouth right now, he's not having anything in his pocket. So he moves beyond, Thar, and then only he takes a breath of respite that, okay, fine, I'm saved from this particular desert or desert people. In this entire scale of cattle wealth, the industry around the cow is again very, very huge. Milk production, ghee production. Ample evidences from Bishnoi villages, ample evidences from the villages of Jalore and Medta, where the ghee production is so high that everyone is eating ghee. Beyond that, they are not only eating, they are also selling ghee. Thirdly, the state is requesting the Banjaras to please come and pick the ghee so that it can be taken to the deficit areas and it can transport out of the region, basically. So we see this is the industry with them, which they need to protect, and they need to survive on that. And they are constantly making efforts in order to do it. That's it from my side. Thank you. Ishan, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chaudhary, for that wonderful lecture. And I personally got to know a lot from this, and I look forward to the book that is in press. The title of the book is Talking Thar, and we look forward to the book, and we look forward to launching the book on our platform very soon, whenever that comes out. Thank you so much. And those who are watching us, they can send their questions to Dr. Chaudhary and to Karwan through our email address, that is karwanheritage@gmail.com. Uh, I think there is a comment, Dr. Chaudhary, and I'll read that out for you. It is by Nagavant Singh. Uh, he says, "Thank you so much, ma'am, for this engaging lecture. The way you have explained the Thar region in its totality has really enlightened us. I was wondering about the aspects of gender relationship because, as you have explained about the region, which I found very peculiar in its functions."
Thank you, Nagvanji, for this question. I'm like directly answering, but I should answer to Ishan because he's the medium through. So Ishan, in the first place, the book is already out. It has come. So the book is already there. It is available now. Secondly, as far as gender relations are concerned, I have dealt them in my book, but I'm not talking of that here because already the topic was very large. It was environment and economy. So I didn't speak about it. But yes, my book looks into gender also. Throughout my period of fellowship, or you can say research on Thar, I have tried to locate that how significant contributions women were making in this region. And whenever you see the Oran, so Oran is one very, very significant place, which is mainly an attachment, a property of the temple. All these Orans are mainly the properties which women are maintaining. And these are the properties which are very well maintained because these women go with a belief that if they try to do any harm to this Oran, the deity is going to be angry and the wrath will come on them. So therefore they always try to protect it. And secondly, in terms of economic contribution, men when they migrate, women is the only one who stays back. Secondly, when men is in trade, she's the only one who's taking care of the things. So I'm still like I have discussed it in my book a bit, but I'm still looking for the sources wherein I can say it explicitly. But definitely, when you look at the Bahi of 18th century or 17th century in Bikaner, you can very well say women was mainly a chattel who can be, shifted here and taken there. If there is a lady who becomes a widow, then there is a money which will be incurred and then she will be married off. Again, the money will come to the state. And the Chaurikar is one very, very significant aspect to look into by which we can identify that, yes, this was the role of the women, which is equally a partner in production. But I will say, if you would like to read on this in terms of Bikaner, Shashi Devda has written fascinatingly about the Chaurikar. She was a professor and now she's retired, but her work is very, very significant to see the Chaurikar.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering that question. And Xenia asks that I have a curiosity which maybe you can address. How many Banjaras today are mostly found in South India?
The number is not fixed, but in again, because I have written one book on the Banjaras, I have seen that mainly in the Banjara Hill they are there. And if you try to see the population, because most of them have moved out, like as we know, our social movement, or you can say the movement out of caste and community, is mainly happening as our economic standard improves. So we see there are very few Banjaras who are significantly saying we are Banjaras. But otherwise, you see, they simply move out of this particular thing and they don't want to call themselves Banjara anymore. There's a long history to this reason. And in South India, I think now, if we talk of Banjara Hill and certain areas in Tamil Nadu, there are like nearly 15 to 20,000 Banjaras in those regions.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So if our viewers have any other queries, they can write us at caravanheritage@gmail.com. We'll be forwarding your emails to Dr. Chaudhary and she can get back to you through email. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out so much time to deliver this lecture, and we look forward to having you again very soon. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. You can subscribe to Carvan for many more upcoming sessions. There are many more sessions in October and in November. So do join us for that. And I'll be ending the live now. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in.
I would like to thank everyone before it, and thanks Ishan and Karma for extending this to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I'm humbled. Thank you.